Hit it.
It's Friday, September 5th, 2025, episode 273. I'm Patrick Ceresna.
And I'm Kevin Muir. This week, we welcome Bespoke Group's head of research, Jacob Shapiro. We have a wide-ranging discussion about the end of the unipolar world, what it means for your investments, and where Jacob sees the best opportunities going forward. And then this week, Patrick is back from a well-deserved vacation, and there are tons of market developments where we need the crayon interpretations.
And folks, stick around. I'd like to say that Danny, hop on and tell him what beer I'm drinking, but we talked about this, Kevin.
Yes, you did. I was going to say, Patrick, you've already fallen down.
You did too.
Plan.
You did too. We were supposed to get back into the routine of this, and we dropped the ball. Okay, next week.
Next week.
All right, Danny, you got to give us at least a 3-day heads up to figure this out. All right, Kev, give us some side effects here, buddy.
Nothing in this podcast should be viewed as investment advice. Listeners should consult an investment professional before making any decisions regarding topics mentioned in the show. Side effects of too much huddle may include the Powell pivot psychosis, rate cut complacency complex,
relevant.
And the Jobs miss meltdown disorder.
Well, it didn't look like that at the morning, but anyway, we'll talk about it when we get to talking charts. Let's get the guest on here, buddy.
All right, it's our great pleasure to welcome to the show Jacob Shapiro, the Director of Research at the Bespoke Group. Jacob, thanks for taking the time.
It's my pleasure, Kevin, and thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here.
I'm looking forward to this. Originally, I think what caught my eye was this terrific piece that you wrote about Europe, and we're going to get to that. And since you wrote that piece, there's been a ton of other developments on the kind of geopolitical investment front that we can talk about. But before we do that, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself? Let's get to know you a little. Did you grow up always thinking you were going to be, a geopolitical / investment analyst?
Not at all. I thought I was going to be an academic, and my undergraduate training, my undergraduate degree is in Middle Eastern Studies.
Okay.
But I was interested in medieval Islamic philosophy. So I was translating the Quran and translating, Ibn Rushd and Averroes and from Arabic into English, and trying to think about how Plato made his way to the Renaissance via the Arabs. And I graduated into the 2008 financial crisis, and I didn't want to go straight to grad school. And for a while, I was waiting tables at a Cajun restaurant. And then I filed an internship application for this company called Stratfor, which advertises a global intelligence company. And I went to Stratfor as an intern. I worked there for 3 months, mostly making coffee for other people and nobody really listening to me. And then the Arab Spring kicked off. And remarkably, even though Stratfor was a global intelligence company, they didn't have anyone on staff who spoke Arabic. And suddenly, knowing something about the Quran and being able to think about religious tropes on the Arab street and how that was intersecting with protests and things like that. I went from making coffee to being asked, well, what's going to happen with Mubarak and what's going to happen with Syria? And I never really looked back. I did have a quarter life crisis where I went back and got a master's and thought I'd get a doctorate. I lasted through the end of my master's and then came straight back to the geopolitical consulting world. And that's the second part of my journey. Was I did largely geopolitical risk consulting for 10 years, mostly for companies, or writing analyses for public consumption. And about right after the pandemic, there was a registered investment advisor that reached out to me and said, hey, we really like what you're doing, and we think that geopolitics is going to be really important from an investment perspective. Will you come and sort of pitch your analysis more at an investment angle? And that was in 2020, and I never looked back. And it turned out that the work that I was doing was really, really valuable for different investors. And I now have joined the Bespoke Group, and thinking about geopolitics through the lens of research that helps investment decisions is where I've landed. And I have to tell you also, it's been liberating for me, because for the 10 years I was doing consulting, you can write the greatest report in the history of human civilization, but no matter what you do, it's really hard to objectively measure whether you were right or not. Did you get a forecast right? Did you have the right timeline? Can you argue that you did get it right, even though it wasn't correct? In investing, it's very, very simple. It's, did the trade work or not? Right. Did the decision result in a good outcome or not? And it strips away the ideology. It strips away the politics. It strips away the ambiguity of analysis. So I have really come to appreciate the discipline that the market gives me, because I can do my analysis and then I get an immediate feedback mechanism for whether I'm right or not. And it makes me sort of that much stronger. So yeah, it was a very circuitous path from medieval Islamic scholar to global geopolitics expert.
That's fascinating. And I remember, I'm much older than you, and I remember listening to George Friedman in terms of his analysis, and he was kind of at the forefront of geopolitics being introduced to the markets. Would you agree? He's probably one of the kind of first pioneers in that.
There are two godfathers of geopolitics in the United States. There's Ian Bremmer and there's George Friedman. Okay. And I can't remember who made this metaphor first, but it's the perfect one. Ian Bremmer is the Marvel version of geopolitics, and George is the DC Comics version of geopolitics. And Ian really cut his teeth on Wall Street and with energy companies. Right. And George cut his teeth on large-scale subscriptions to people around the world who were just buying an individual subscription, and then much more niche-related, sort of intelligence-related things. But it's the two of them that were at the core of it. And anybody who is doing geopolitics for real in the United States comes from one of those two people. Like, there's nobody else out there, I think, who really has emerged without at least crossing paths or owing a big debt to the two of them.
I can't help but talk about George Friedman. You're probably going to want to skip this, responding to this, but I'm still waiting for The Coming War with Japan. Do you know that book?
And George would, of course I do. And George would tell. George was my mentor. Like, I helped start Geopolitical Futures with him. Like, he was the one that taught me the ropes. George and my father were best friends in grad school at Cornell back in the day. So, like, George is I have a very, very warm and fond appreciation for George in my heart, and I wouldn't be the analyst I am today without George. So if you ask George, when is that coming war with Japan? He would say, well, it's I just got the timing wrong. Like, the war could still technically be coming. And to George's credit, the coming war with Japan was the title was incendiary. It was made to sell books. But The Coming War with Japan in some ways is my favorite book of his, because it lays out his methodology. So even if the call was not necessarily correct, all the different tools that George taught me how to use, they're worked out in the Coming War with Japan. The bestsellers that came later are really for popular consumption. The Coming War with Japan is where you should go if you're a nerd and you want to learn how to do these things. And just the second thing I would say is, and this is to George's credit, like, if you ask George, and I've asked George before, what the biggest blind spots for his prognostications were in the 90s and 2000s, I think he would tell you it was September 11th and the rise of jihadism in the Muslim world. That was a dynamic that really wasn't on his bingo card and really reshaped American foreign policy, the role of liberalism in the world. The Coming War with Japan, the title's incendiary, but the actual tome is actually quite good and quite nuanced.
Okay. Well, why don't we take a moment and step back, and why don't you tell us about your philosophy of the world and how it's developed over the past couple of decades? Why don't we start with 9/11, how it changed the world, and then how you see it developing from a geopolitical stage. And then what we'll do is we'll eventually get to the current environment and what you see there and how that affects our investments.
That sounds great. So the first thing I would say, and here I would refer your listeners to Philip Tetlock, who I don't know if you've heard of him in his book, Super Forecasters, but Tetlock did a study where he was trying to figure out, is there anything that makes political forecasters more accurate than others? And the only thing he could really find, I'm grossly oversimplifying his point, but the only thing he could really find that was statistically relevant was this division that he makes between foxes and hedgehogs. And hedgehogs are somebody who knows one thing and repeats it over and over and over again. And foxes are people who change their minds constantly. And one of the things that he found was that hedgehogs get more play in the media or even in briefing rooms because they can be very compelling. They can simplify things down to one thing, and they can make you feel, oh, this is the thing. I'm confident that this is the truth. I can move forward with this insight. And even as they're wrong over and over and over again, they keep getting listened to because they have that confidence and they can be understandable. The hardest thing for an intellectual fox or an analytical fox is to communicate without completely confusing the person that he's talking to. Because a fox could say one day, this is what I think is most probable, and then gets a new data point and says, I was wrong. It's the exact complete opposite. And if you're dealing with somebody who's trying to get a media hit, or if you're even briefing somebody who's in high executive office, they don't want a 360-degree change or a 180-degree change. They want some level of consistency. So I'm an analytical and intellectual fox.
Okay.
And I think my greatest skill, if you will, is that I'm able to be a fox without hopefully completely overwhelming the person that is listening to me. I can simplify it enough that I can communicate my ideas without, trading what I think is an allegiance to understanding that things are dynamic and changeable. And that's what politics is. The moment you try to do analysis and say, this is true, you're already done. Like, politics is constantly evolving. It's an act of extreme hubris to sit down, like the piece you mentioned that I wrote about Europe. The idea that I could sit down and write a piece 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it would be the end all of what's going on with the geopolitics of Europe and the United States. It is such an act of fundamental hubris, because 500 different things could happen after I write that piece that completely invalidate it. So you have to have the confidence that, okay, I can take the snapshot now, but hey, if I'm wrong 2 weeks from now, you're going to hear it from me first. I'm going to be the one that tells you it first. Let me give you a practical example, actually, of what I'm talking about. In my early days, when we were trying to figure out investing in geopolitics, I did not think Russia was going to invade Ukraine. I thought that it was all a bluff. I was talking to analyst friends in Moscow who were telling me it was a bluff. That was a mistake to listen to them. But so for some of our clients, we had small positions in Russian equities because we thought they looked undervalued, and we thought the market was pricing an invasion that we didn't think was going to come. And I remember very vividly, you might remember this too, when Vladimir Putin called his National Security Council together and they made a big to-do of it. They broadcast it everywhere, and they were talking about how Zelensky's a fascist and they have to restore Russian values to Ukraine and things like that. And I called a meeting of our team and I said, sell it all now. And the team didn't want to do it. They were like, well, let's see how it plays over the next couple of days. Like, maybe you're overreacting. And I said, no, I was wrong. It's broken. Get out now, because if you don't get out now, I'm not sure you're going to be able to get out. So we got out with a very, very small loss. And 4 or 5 days later, Russian market shut down. You couldn't have gotten out if you wanted to. So I'm not happy that I got the invasion call wrong, but I was very proud that I was able to see in real time, crap, I messed that up and we need to fix it very, very quickly. So
you were like Gordon Gekko when you said sell it all. That's all I could think about. The scene in Wall Street, sell it all.
Sell it all. When the analytical take is broken, you have to swallow your pride and say, I was wrong. And it's a really hard thing for people to do. So I come from, that's my analytical background. And I think in some ways my superpower is being able to see when I'm wrong and not taking these things personally. I only care if I'm getting things right. And then the bigger macro thing that I would say, and people who hear me, that I'm convinced that they're sick of me saying this. And I'm also a contrarian, and people are beginning to agree with this take. So I have this innate instinct to be like, oh, I have to change the take.
I know that feeling.
But from roughly 1990 until, I would say, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think we were living in a unipolar world. I think the United States was the unquestioned political, economic, cultural, military power in the world, full stop. The buck literally stopped with us. And I think we have now shifted from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, one in which we have rising and falling great powers all across the world, different and shifting coalitions. I am, by the way, not saying that we're headed towards a US-China competition. I think the consensus view is that we're headed towards another bipolar world with a second Cold War, with the US and its allies on one side, China on the other side. That's a possibility, and it's a scenario I take seriously, but that's not what I model. For me, it's not the 1930s or 1940s. It's not the 1960s or 1970s. I look to the 1890s for the closest historical analog to what we're talking about. And I think we're in the very, very early stages of this. The United States is still the most powerful and richest country in the world. It just can't dictate its terms like it was able to in the late 1990s and even in the early 2000s. And I think you can see that in the way that some countries are reacting to heavy-handed US trade policy. And you can see that in the way that some countries are moving away from the dollar and thinking about how they can future-proof their financial security with a mercurial United States. So at the very, very top level, the macro view that doesn't change for me is we're moving from unipolar to multipolar. And most of my time as an analyst is spent thinking about, how am I wrong about this? What is the signal that the multipolar world is not emerging, that it is going to be the US versus China, or it's going to be complete anarchy? But that's my overall view. I think we're headed towards multipolarity. I think we're in the early stages of it. And I think the current administration, ironically, is accelerating that shift. Things that I thought were going to happen in the mid-2030s, they're happening now. And they're happening now as a result of US government policy. And I try to be very, very objective in what I'm talking about. You can make a pro or con case for that. Is it good that our politicians are bringing the crisis forward so that we can deal with it now? Is it better that they kick the can down the road and buy us more time? I don't know. That's a question beyond my pay grade, but I think the objective fact is they're bringing the crisis forward. They're bringing the acceleration of this multipolar trend forward. And I think people are not ready for that. I think people have gotten used to the notion that the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and that the dollar is the reserve currency, and that ultimately, things are going to flow based on decisions in Washington. I think all that is changing beneath us.
So I couldn't agree with you more about the Trump speeding up things that previously felt like they were way off in the distance. One example I give is I've been thinking to myself, eventually, if there's inflation for long enough, we're going to see a situation where they start fudging the numbers. I thought that was going to be 5 years, 10 years down the road. I didn't think it would be 5 months into his term where he's, firing the BLS person. And I'm just thinking, for example, about YCC in terms of yield curve control. I thought, this is going to be something that is going to take, maybe record wides in the yield curve before they do it. Now I'm thinking, geez, it might happen next year. Like it might be sooner rather than later. One of the things that I wanted to just ask you about is that you have this great podcast, Geopolitical Cousins, with your pal, Marco Popich. We'll talk about that later. But one of the things that he said, and I guess you guys echo this, and part of the reason why you might call yourselves Geopolitical Cousins, he says, in a world of multipolarity, there are no real friends or enemies. There are just interests. And that's what Marco talked about. Do you agree with that? And could you explain that in terms of how it's shaping, maybe expand on how you're thinking about all the different trades and the different, how you see the world?
Yeah, foreign relations are much more transactional. But as much as I love, he's my cousin by choice. As much as I love cousin Marco, you can go back to George Washington for this take. Go back to George Washington's farewell address, and he talks about how the United States should not have permanent allies. That it is not the United States' business to go about intervening in other places around the world. That the United States needs to protect its interests, and the United States existed that way. That was basically primary U.S. foreign policy, with some exceptions for Latin America, an exception in World War I. But until World War II, United States policy was to be isolationist. We did not have a huge military until the build out in World War I, and especially in World War II. And the thing that happened with World War II is we woke up at the end of World War II and realized suddenly we were the last one standing, and we were the most powerful. And in, I think, a good faith effort to create a more peaceful and prosperous world, it was, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the architect, but then, administrations of both parties continued to build it. We built this liberal international order, with the idea being that there were certain rules that all countries had to follow. And chief among them was, we want trade. We want people to be able to trade more, because that's going to lead to more prosperity. And if you don't agree with that, if you're on the other side of that, then the United States will intervene, or you will have to join in with the Soviets and get their crappy cars and their crappy political infrastructure and everything else. And the United States won the Cold War. It defeats the Soviet Union in 1990. And again, nobody's left standing. If you look at the world in the 1990s, there's no country that can even come close to holding a candle to US power. So there are a few holdouts that don't go along with it. We can name them probably on one hand: Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. That's probably the list right there. There might be a few others that I'm forgetting. So you have some outliers, but most everybody else in the world starts listening to Third Eye Blind and starts trading with the United States, and eventually wants an iPhone, and eventually everybody wants to come to the United States. And the United States is finally this shining beacon on the hill that it always thought it was going to be for itself. As you switch to a multipolar world, what's happening is some of those countries, and China is the perfect example. In the 1990s, it was completely in China's interests to trade more with the United States and to have a good relationship with the United States. As China became more wealthy and more prosperous and started to get into the middle income trap, well, the things that the United States wanted from it in the trading relationship didn't make sense to China so much. And so China is saying, well, actually, we want to do things, we want to reset the rules a little bit here. We think we've earned a bigger seat at the table. We think that things should protect some of our interests going forward. And the United States is not the United States of George Washington. It's not even the United States of FDR, which it took Japan literally bombing Pearl Harbor to get the U.S. into the war. For years, FDR wanted to get into the war. He couldn't do it because public opinion was so against him. But for 30, 40, 50 years, we have an entire foreign policy establishment and a cultural sense that we are the most powerful, that everybody wants to be like us, that the ideals of America are exceptional, and that everybody should embrace them. And in a multipolar world, where interests, as Marco points out, are more important than those relationships, in some ways alliances become a burden, because instead of expending resources on yourself, you have to go expend resources on protecting all of your allies. This, by the way, is one of the reasons that the Chinese have no allies. Their only defense treaty security relationship is with North Korea, and they didn't even really want that. That's a hangover from the Korean War and really an anachronism from the Cold War. But they don't want permanent security relationships. They have their hands full with what they currently have. And if you're the United States and you're realizing, our economic power and the threat of military force does not create the same type of subservience is the wrong word, but doesn't go as far as it used to, and you want to expend resources to start, say, manufacturing things in the United States again, or making sure that you control the commanding heights of the technology economy, well, suddenly you can see how maybe supporting these allies as part of this liberal international world order, which no longer seems to exist and which is being challenged more and more by these revisionist powers daily, you can see how overextending those alliances becomes a bit of a burden. A great example of this is NATO. NATO was an alliance led by the United States to resist the Soviet Union. It did a wonderful job of doing that. I forget how many countries were in NATO originally. I think it was 12 or 13, but somebody can go to Wikipedia and check me on that. NATO makes no sense today because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. And it's extended to 27 and 28 members, including extremely small states in the Balkans, like Montenegro, I believe, wants NATO membership or recently got it. That doesn't make any sense. Like, what is having these countries in the alliance do if the goal is to resist a country, the Soviet Union, which doesn't even exist anymore? So there is this kind of alliance overhang. And as things shift in a multipolar world, you want to be able to be a little bit more transactional. And that's one of the reasons why I would encourage listeners to go back and look at the 1890s, look at the different foreign relationships that happened at that time period. It was a time of actually increasing trade. But it was also a time of immense competition all around the world. And countries that at one, like for instance, the United Kingdom and France, mortal enemies in the 19th century and in the 18th century. Suddenly they were on the same side of things because they saw the rise of Germany and they saw the rise of these other things. They realized they had to put bygones to be bygones. The Ottomans align with the Germans and with some of these others as part of the Central Powers that eventually fight World War I. So all of these shifting things that depend on different interests at one time, and all of that as a result of the fact that there wasn't one country that was calling the shots, or not one country that was setting the rules. And that's the type of environment we're in today.
Do you think that this was a trend that was in the making regardless of Trump, and he just accelerated it, or he was even kind of the chosen one based upon the fact that we were headed this way? Or is this something like, if let's just imagine we have a shift back to the Democrats in 3 or 4 years, will we go back to that, unipolar world, and will we ever return to that? Or is this something we should put in the rearview mirror and it was headed this way anyways?
I feel like I've been a little long-winded, so let me be a little succinct here. We're not going back. Okay. I'm not certain about that many things because I'm the fox. I can tell you the one thing I'm absolutely certain of: we're not going back. So we might get a new unipolar order in 10 or 15 years based on how things develop. But the idea that we're going backwards, that's a recipe for disaster. That's the wrong mental model to think about. I don't think there's no going back at all to that sort of previous view. It's interesting to date sort of when multipolarity began to arise. I was still banging the drum for a unipolar world until about 2017. And I'll tell you what changed my mind. I was invited to, and I'll probably never get invited again, but I was invited to a conference in Moscow at MGIMO, which is basically the think tank for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was the token American that they wanted to have there as a whipping boy. I was listening to all these analysts from all these other different countries, and ones that were more aligned with Russia than with the United States. And as I was sitting there listening, I was realizing these countries care much less about what the United States thinks and wants than what I assumed. And a lot of these countries, whether we're talking about India, Iran, China, South Africa, Turkey, like these countries are thinking very, very differently. And it was around 2017. This was actually a break I made with George. I was with George at the time at Geopolitical Futures, and George, I think, continues to think that the United States is the supreme power in the world, and that it's going through a period of domestic political strife, but will come out stronger on the other end. Maybe so, but here today, I think the world is incredibly multipolar. That was a fairly out there take to make in 2017. And cousin Marco and I are bonded by the trauma of being told for years of how wrong and stupid we were in 2017, 2018. I would not date the beginning of multipolarity or the clear signal that multipolarity is back with Donald Trump. That moment in 2016, I think, was much more about wealth inequality in the United States and populism in American politics. The two most popular candidates were Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And if Bernie had been actually put on the ballot, if the Democrats had been able to swallow that, I actually think Bernie might have won. But I think that was much more about US domestic politics. I think it was very clear that we were in a multipolar world when COVID broke out, because COVID was a disease, a virus that comes for all of us, no matter what our creed, sexual orientation, nationality, language. COVID doesn't care. It's going to infect you. And it's, for a small percentage of the population, going to be deadly. And for most of us, a really big pain in the ass, if you'll pardon my French. And instead of, in previous, you would expect in a unipolar world with a liberal international order that we would all bond together and say, let us, sort of like on Independence Day, the movie, like, let's fight this thing that is coming for all of us together. Let's share resources. Let's figure out how to get vaccines out there. Let's share personal protective equipment. That's not what happened at all. It started with China not telling people about what was really going on. Then China started hoarding all of the protective equipment that we needed for medicine, a lot of which is now manufactured in China. When the West realized what was going on, it immediately started, turning up the research machine to figuring out a vaccine, but didn't want to share that with other countries, didn't want to eradicate it globally. It was very much, no, we have to take care of ourselves. We're not going to take care of some of these others. And by the way, we're going to punish others for not doing things with us. You might remember this was the time of the phase 1 US-China trade deal. And the vaccine politics and the COVID politics actually got in the way of the US and China working on trade. It looked like we were actually on a good trajectory to some kind of understanding with China, at least on trade, authored by the first Trump administration. So for me, the real beginning of the break was COVID, and the nail in the coffin was Russia invading Ukraine. I think you could still argue after COVID, okay, this is an exogenous force. People were scared, but ultimately the world is going to come back when things turn back on. And when the world came back on, what did we get? We got the biggest land conflict in Europe since World War II, because Russia thought it could just go into Kyiv and conquer a country. Right. That tells you we're in a multipolar world, because Russia thought it could do that. And the United States, it's easy to forget this now because Ukraine has defended itself so well, and the United States and the Europeans helped prop them up. The initial US response to Russia invading Ukraine was to evacuate the embassies, was to get out. We didn't think they had a prayer of standing up to them. The Germans agreed to send 10,000 helmets, military helmets, to the Ukrainian people to help. They weren't talking about anti-tank missiles and rockets and drones and things like that. Like, everybody thought it was a fait accompli. Yeah. So just the fact that you had Russia thinking it could do that, and you had the West not willing to stand up to Russia against that, to being willing to say, okay, like, Ukraine, not so important as part of our liberal international order. Like, Russia's just going to have to take that, and that's really sad. Let's go back to business. Like, that's when I think it was incontrovertible. But I would say COVID and Russia's invasion of Ukraine are the big multipolar markers for me. Donald Trump's election and his first term were part of another thing. Now, his second term is a different story. The foreign policies that the U.S. is pushing right now, we can talk about this more if you want, would be very at home in sort of U.S. imperial foreign policy from the early 1900s. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing so much friction in U.S. policy and U.S. relations with the world is that President Trump is trying to govern like William McKinley or Teddy Roosevelt, and he doesn't have the cards. He's holding empty cards. It's basically all bluffs, and his bluff is getting called all around the world. And when the bluff isn't getting called, it's people ingratiating themselves to him so that they can get short-term deals, but in the background preparing for a world in which they don't want to be so closely dependent on or aligned with the United States.
Okay, we'll get to that. Let's just take one step back before we get off of the multipolar world. Are there any investment changes that come directly from this move from a unipolar to a multipolar world that you can think about? Like, what, yes, understanding that affects your portfolio construction or how you think about markets in the following ways.
Yeah, it's if you were a geopolitical analyst from the 1990s to 2015, 2020, it was actually a fairly boring job, because if you were a good analyst for 30 years, your answer should have been buy American or buy American allies, or at least buy countries that are aligned with the US-led trading regime. So it should have been buy US. If you want to get a little unorthodox, buy Germany or buy China, and then go play golf. go to lunch. Don't worry about it too much. Don't worry when you get a dot-com bubble or some of these other things. Those are buying opportunities. Very clear that the United States is going to do well. Allies of the United States are going to do well. Places where manufacturing is going at the behest of the United States, all those things are going to do well. I don't think you can think that way anymore. I think that we're primed for international outperforming U.S. domestic here going forward. I don't think U.S. allies are necessarily the best place to be thinking. I now am thinking about rising powers that can be vertically integrated economic regional centers of power in their own right. So for me, some of the most interesting countries to think about investing in, China is difficult. It's sort of a different animal. But for when I wake up in the morning, I'm looking at the newspapers of Mexico, Brazil, Turkey, and India every single morning. For me, those are some of the four hinge states. And maybe not all of them will realize their potential. Maybe none of them will. Maybe the multipolar paradigm is off. But those are four countries that have the requisite level of size and ability to vertically integrate that I think can perform extremely well in a multipolar world. And then this is something that I've come to, really in the last year or two. We talked about the Trump administration accelerating things. I have been a Bitcoin skeptic for most of my career. And one of my partners at Bespoke Group, Matt McClintock, always jokes with me that everybody buys Bitcoin at the price they deserve. Well, the price that this geopolitical analyst deserved was 110,000. And it was 110,000 because we were seeing things out of the United States, whether it was, you've already alluded to it, firing the BLS commissioner, bullying the Federal Reserve into lowering rates, haphazard and completely volatile U.S. trade policy, gold completely outperforming not just the U.S. dollar, but the S&P 500, anything else, like all of these dynamics happening. Then also just the widening U.S. debt, which is completely impossible to ignore right now. There's no politician or party in the United States that cares at all about fiscal conservatism. If you are a fiscal conservative, the only president you should admire since Eisenhower is Bill Clinton. And usually the Republicans have been the worst offenders. So you put all those things together and the politicization of U.S. financial strength. You've got somebody like me who's saying, well, suddenly Bitcoin looks pretty good. And suddenly I'm thinking about gold and Singapore dollar and Swiss franc and hard assets like real estate or American farmland. Whereas before, like those weren't things that I would want to park my money. They get much bigger returns than some of the other areas that you would be. So yes, at that very top level, the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity has an absolutely massive impact on portfolio construction. It's a complete and total paradigm shift.
Okay, that's great stuff. Now let's go back to what you had mentioned there about basically Trump's bluffs being called, and talk a little bit about how you see the current environment and what's happening. And you said that Trump doesn't have any of the cards, and that's almost the opposite of what they're telling everyone. Like, how do you square that?
Don't listen to them. I don't listen to anyone. Don't listen to any politicians. You also shouldn't have listened to Biden when he said inflation was under control and that he was going to get gas. I haven't listened to the only politician in my lifetime who I think tells the truth a majority of the time. I'm not saying I agree with him. I actually disagree with about 60% of the things that comes out of his mouth. But the only politician in my lifetime that I think is actually telling the truth is Bernie Sanders. That's the list. I don't think anybody else is telling the truth any amount of time. So I wouldn't take what Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or George, what any of them, like tune it out, like listen to what the data is telling you. And I think the other metaphor that I've used to describe this with the United States is I think that the way that the US is enacting policy is going to lead to a form of radiation sickness. If you're exposed to a high dose of radiation, you get sick initially, but then you start to get better. It looks like you're improving and that you've kicked it. But the problem is that radiation damages the underlying cellular structure. And so over a longer period of time, your cells won't be able to replicate. Or if they are able to replicate, you'll get higher incidences of cancer and things like that. Your body has been fundamentally damaged. That, I think, is what we're looking at with the United States. I think many people, especially those with Trump derangement syndrome, thought he was going to announce tariffs and boom, inflation was going to be 10% and everything was going to be terrible. No, that's not the way this is going to work. I think actually he did the initial sort of onslaught of policy. Markets didn't really blink. I mean, we had, the drawdown in April, but we're doing incredibly well when you think about it on the year, considering everything that's gone on. And it looked for a period of time like things were going well. But now you start to look underneath the hood and you see the jobs reports going in the wrong direction. you see, particularly concerning for me, electricity prices increasing massively across the board in the United States, and Trump's own Department of Energy saying that the status quo is completely unrealistic and that we're looking at 30 to 60% increases in electricity prices for the average American. You're looking at manufacturing contraction in the United States, which is the exact opposite of what you would expect with the Make America Great policies again. You're looking at Robert F. Kennedy Jr. basically eviscerating the US lead in technology and health around the world. We are ceding that to China and other countries around the world because of the crazy ideas of this guy who's in charge of all these other different things. And then you get the immigration problem too. One of the great US strengths, one of our great superpowers is our ability to assimilate immigrants. You don't get the teeming masses from Central America and South. They're not trying to go to China. They're not trying to go to Japan. They're coming to the United States because they think they can have a better life in the United States. And we've turned around on this sort of nativist anti-immigration phenomenon, even as our birth rates have rapidly declined, especially since COVID. And so it's unclear about whether we're going to continue to add both, immigrants who are doing the labor that nobody wants to do in the United States, or those top really, really smart people and researchers from around the world who used to come to US universities and then stay here. And now we're saying, maybe I'll go home, or maybe I'll go to a Chinese university, or maybe I'll go somewhere else. So you put all those things together, it's not going to be an immediate impact. But I think the Trump administration will try and make us think that everything is great, and they'll put lipstick on the pig. And honestly, I think it'll probably be a good year or two, probably. I mean, we're getting some concerning data right now, but my expectation is that things will probably bounce along the way that they need to be, but that the long-term impact of some of these things are going to make the United States less competitive. And it's going to, again, accelerate that notion of looking towards places internationally. Like, international is being spurred to growth by the way that the United States is dealing with some of these countries. And that, I think, on that 5-10 year time horizon, it's as clear as day to me right now.
Okay. So in terms of, let's go back to the markets. Do you think that this is just a function of them, continuing a trend that has gone on for a while? And you see the tick data, and money still seems to be flowing into the US, which I don't understand. And there's still, even though international stocks are doing terrific and outperforming the US, there's still, everyone's focused on the US. And it's kind of shocking to me that all these things that you mentioned, they make complete sense, but yet nobody's talking about it. Nobody believes, very few believe it. And I was wondering how you reconcile that. Is that just markets can be inefficient for longer than you expect?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things there. The first is, the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which probably gets overused, but the true mark of intelligence is being to hold two contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time and continue to function. And this is where, when I say a multipolar world is emerging, often people hear, oh, the United States is in decline, terminal decline. I don't. I think the United States is going to be one of the most powerful and prosperous nations in this multipolar world that I'm talking about. I'm just saying we're not going to be omnipotent anymore, and we're going to have some real important policy decisions and political decisions. And I think that's coming, by the way. If you look at lots of polling of the US electorate, nobody likes this government, and nobody liked the Biden government either. Nixon's silent majority is out there sitting, waiting for somebody sane to talk some sense to them and to give them good policy. And we've been here before in US politics. Usually what has to happen to get there is the economy has to basically roll over. This happened in the 1970s with stagflation. It happened in the 1920s, roaring 20s. It also, by the way, happened in the 1850s. Hopefully we can avoid the movie that happened at the end of the 1850s. And I think we're probably going to get there. It would be nice if US politics was more forward thinking than that. But we're a democracy. We argue with each other about which bathroom we're going to go into until things actually get really difficult. And then we're going to make changes. So I think that's probably what happens with the United States. And it's also money is coming in and money is coming out. I think what's changing is where money is coming from and who's interested in it. So there are countries or people and I think the breakdown in US-India relations that the Trump administration has authored might have a huge impact on how Indians are thinking about the United States or about some of those flows in general. But you've got Americans who are looking to get out of the United States, even as you have folks from other countries that are looking to come into the United States because the grass in some sense is always greener. So even as some Americans say, hey, Europe looks pretty good right now, I care about quality of life. If you're somebody who's in Turkey or Brazil or South Africa, US market looks pretty good. If you're in China and you don't want to be part of Xi Jinping's purges and his capital controls and everything else, you probably want to get as much of your money out of China as you possibly can, because the realities of what China's going to have to do are far more grim than what the United States is going to have to go through as well. So again, it's not that capital flows to the United States are going to stop entirely. And it's not that the United States is not going to continue to be a very, very important and very, very prosperous power. It's just that it's not going to be these halcyon days of the last 35 years that we've gotten used to. And there will be sectors and countries that will outperform. And there will be parts of this, by the way, that the United States will probably do incredibly well with. The United States is blessed with, immense energy reserves. Now, there's problems with the grid that we can go into if you want. But most countries would kill to have the level of self-sufficiency that we have when it comes to energy commodities or agricultural commodities or some of these other things. Most leaders in the world would trade their situation for America's problems in a heartbeat, because America's problems are much easier to solve. It's about getting people to agree with each other and stop squabbling, not about, say, like China, which is, we just don't have enough land to grow food for the people. Or another country like Turkey, which until recently, when it has some big offshore natural gas discoveries, we don't have the energy here. We don't like Russia. We're mortal enemies with Russia, but we have to import energy resources from Russia. So we can't just give them the middle finger and move on, which goes back to our conversation about interests versus alliances. So that's how I would square that. Like, don't take from what I'm saying in the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity that the U.S. is in terminal decline. Just take from what I'm saying that I think there are really, really interesting international opportunities that are out there. And I think that on a 5-10 year time horizon, you want to be exposed to those international opportunities, and you want to be very picky and choosy about what parts of the US market you want to be involved with, because some of it might be too frothy, some of it we might be in decline, and then other parts of it might be rising.
All right. So you mentioned China, and you said that right there that you should be looking at international other markets. And I take it that you're probably not going to be a bull on China, and you highlighted some challenges they face. Right now, it seems to be that a lot of folks are getting back on the China bull bandwagon, and I was wondering what you think there, and if you could highlight the long-term concerns you have about them.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm a China bull, but relative to most geopolitical analysts, I'm actually pretty optimistic about China, and I wouldn't bet against China. That doesn't mean I would bet for it necessarily, but I certainly would not bet against it. People have been saying that China was going to collapse in on itself since literally the 1970s. Peter Zeihan has been out there saying that China is going to collapse from the inside since I worked with him at Stratfor in 2010, sort of like the coming war with Japan sort of model. I don't think we can overstate how big the problem China is facing. So China it's supposed to be a communist country. It's a communist country in all but name. It's an incredibly unequal country in terms of wealth. The coastal cities that have enriched themselves in this period of globalization are some of the most cutting edge cities in the entire world. They make American cities look terrible by comparison. But you go into China's interior, you've got hundreds of millions of people who are still living on $7 to $10 a day or something like that, and whose livelihoods, they might as well be peasants from the 1970s and the 1980s. And the difficult thing that China has to do is it has to redistribute that wealth from the coast to the interior without A, the folks on the coast coming for Xi's head because they don't want to give up their money, and B, without doing it too slowly such that the peasants rise up and say, we want new leadership because we're not enjoying the same benefits that the rest of the Chinese population is enjoying. And that is, I think, why Xi Jinping has claimed dictatorial powers for himself, because he knows that this isn't going to work in the old sort of 30 year from 1990 to when he was elected or chosen in 2012, 2013. You can't just reform and open up and build things in China. Like, you've got problems in terms of wealth inequality, and communism is becoming delegitimized, and you have to inject a sense of national pride into China and a new mission into China if you're going to pull off these things. No country has really pulled this off. Japan is maybe the best example of a country that did it, and their way of doing it was their lost decades after the 1990s and the collapse of Chinese stock bubble and real estate crisis. And China's starting at a much poorer base than Japan was in the 1990s. So it's an incredible feat that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party has in front of it. Okay, that sounds all bad. The stuff that's good is you still got a country of 1 billion people. This is also the world's factory. They are the ones that know how to make things. We don't make things in the United States anymore. The stroller that I that I, ride my infant to daycare in, made in China. The children's books that I read to my kids at night, made in China. The ibuprofen that I give my daughter for her ear infections, active ingredients sourced from China. China makes all of these different products. It's incredibly powerful from that point of view. They have the know-how. The second is, I know that people love to drone on about Chinese demographics, and it's true, their fertility rates suck and they're not going to be able to attract immigrants. But go back to what I said about that inequality. We have hundreds of millions of people here living on something like $7 to $10 a day. If you can make those people middle class, you don't need babies. All of those people will start buying air conditioning units and phones and strollers and all these other things. And the Chinese Communist Party wants those people to be buying made in Chinese goods, whether it's cars or the strollers or everything else. And then the other big cultural change that China has to engender in its people, and this is in some ways becoming the hardest for it to do, the Chinese people remember the chaos of the Mao regime, and they remember the civil wars and all the things that came before it. And so rightfully so, they don't trust stock markets. They don't trust bond markets. They don't trust the economy itself. They want to hide their money under a mattress, or they want to buy their 5th or 6th condo in a ghost city. And the Chinese government is trying to get the animal spirits of the average Chinese consumer to get out from underneath your bed. Go buy something from a company that was made in China. Don't buy another condo. Go play the Chinese stock market. We're going to have all these rules, so the Chinese stocks are going to do a lot better. And if you could get Chinese, like the average Chinese person investing in Chinese markets, well, then you could really have, you're off to the races. If you look at the performance of Indian markets over the past couple of years, the reason they keep on going up, even though Western observers are skeptical about it and maybe it's a bubble, it's because Indians themselves are buying stocks. Every rupee that they have is going to the stock market. So even as international observers are like, this looks a little long in the tooth, you've got 1 billion people coming online who want to buy stocks, who have got the stock bug. If you could do that in China, I mean, you're off to the races. So I can make the case for China collapse and Chinese degradation, but for me, everything they've accomplished so far, I wouldn't underestimate them, and I think that they have more. I think they have more going for them than most people recognize. And if they can metabolize these challenges, and if they can get through them, then I think you really are looking at China not as the global hegemon. They don't want to be the global hegemon, but as the dominant player in East Asia, as the the middle kingdom where everybody has to come and give tribute, where they are the ones that are calling the shots. Yeah, I think that's a very, very realistic phenomenon. And it's as simple as things like, who's going to make air conditioning units that are going to go into places like Japan and South Korea and India? Well, they're probably going to be made in China. Who's going to be making all of these products for the rest of the world? As even as demographics in the West are slowing down, we've still got lots of people coming online in Africa and other places. Like, those products are going to be made in China. And then if you get those Chinese people consuming those products as well, things are going to go well. And then the last thing I would just say, and this in some ways is a signpost for China, Chinese history is fairly cyclical. And you notice that strong central governments in China, when it starts to get away from them, it becomes very obvious. There's an old, I think it's the Tang Dynasty, an old quote that is, the emperor the emperor is far, the hills are high and the emperor is far away. Okay. And the idea that central authority is far away, and you get local warlords or local regions or local military, leaders who are calling the shots. That's not the direction that China's going in. You're getting more centralization. You're getting more central control in the Chinese Communist Party. So if I get a signpost that says there really are true challenges to Xi Jinping's rule, the Chinese Communist Party is starting to come apart at the seams. If we start talking about regional leaders in China that are pushing policies that are maybe not in lockstep with what the central government does, okay, then I'm sitting up in my chair and I'm doing a mea culpa to Peter Zeihan and saying, I guess you were just a little bit early. But what I see is Xi Jinping collecting more and more and more power, and it's working. Right. Like, people are not defying the Chinese government, even in that real estate crisis that they had in the last couple of years. Yes, there were some blips and there were some protests that were pretty scary, but they solved it. People went back to work. People went back to paying their mortgages, and the Chinese Communist Party has become even stronger. So the stronger the central government becomes, the more I think we're at the beginning of a Chinese dynasty, not at the end of one.
Jacob, I could talk to you all day, but we're going to have to bring this to a close. So why don't we end on some positive things? You mentioned Brazil, Turkey. What were the other ones that you liked? There was
Mexico,
4 countries,
India.
Mexico, India. Why don't you give us kind of a quick, these are why I like these. This is an interesting opportunity on all 4.
Yeah. Mexico is fairly simple. and I just did a very long report about nearshoring in Mexico. The way that the United States is prosecuting its trade war means that Mexico is going to be the big winner. The only reason that the United States can push its trade war with China is because we have a country of 100 million plus people with very willing, very cheap, and very skilled labor to our southern border. We are not going to start making clothes and manufacturing things in the United States again. It's just not going to happen. I'll come back on your show and eat my computer if we start doing those things. But they will be made in Mexico. And so Mexico, in some ways, Mexico got screwed by globalization because NAFTA was supposed to be this great thing for Mexico, and it was. It increased Mexican prosperity. It also caused a lot of wealth inequality. But then China came in, and nobody could compete with China. And so a lot of the business that should have been going to Mexico from the United States just went to China because China had 10x the population, had a government that was much more controlled and organized, and said, hey, we're going to set up a special economic zone. They're going to build your iPhones for cheap. If anything goes wrong, we have a gulag for people to go to, whereas Mexico's dealing with cartels, dealing with the informal economy and everything else. So in a world that's unipolar and all you care about is low labor costs, China's going to win. In a world that is multipolar, where you care about politics and political risk and where Chinese labor has become more expensive, well, suddenly Mexico looks much more impressive by comparison. So I think Mexico is going to be the big winner in this reorganization of U.S. trade ties. And I think we're going to see a lot more U.S. companies that are going to be engaging with Mexico, particularly the border towns that have become prey to all these cartels and things like that. Massive economic opportunity for them. People go join cartels and do those things because they have no other opportunities. If you give them opportunities, the cartels are going to want those opportunities. First of all, that means there's more money for them to extort. They're going to want more stability because if you chop people's heads off, the money's not going to be there. And ultimately, I think they're going to be moved by money. So I'm optimistic about Mexico. There are problems with Mexico, but let's stick on the optimism. India, I think, is a fairly simple case. And India, I'm honestly pretty ambivalent about. I cannot make up my mind if India is the next great rising power or if they're just going to collapse in on themselves. And I think the positive argument that you have to make for India, I don't think people realize this. India is such a poor country. We've got a GDP per capita in India that is roughly the same GDP per capita as Haiti, one of the poorest and most backward countries in the entire world. Except India is 1 billion plus people with a government that has been centralizing things and been not perfectly, but getting rid of bureaucracy and red tape and making it easier to do business. You've got lots of cheap labor. If we were going to continue the unipolar trend, if we hadn't had COVID and Russian invasion of Ukraine and Trump and everything else, India would be the next China. And they still can be in a version of that. It's not going to look exactly as it did during the era of globalization, but they're just starting from such a low base and they are so large that, you know, the math is just going to say, okay, like probably India is going to do well in that sense. Now they have tons of other problems. They have water problems. They have, you know, what happens after Modi with poverty. You know, it's nice that they have this size, but that also means 1 billion people who need to get richer and need to have money and who need to eat. Then there's the monsoon cycle, and we could go into all those things. But that's the positive case for India. Turkey, I think, is one of the ones that I'm most proud of and most in front of. I've been banging on the table with Turkey 2018, and if you look at performance of Turkey since 2018, it's been great, and that's because Western media over-indexed on the crazy things Erdogan was saying about interest rate policy and ignoring what was actually happening in Turkish domestic politics. And same sort of thing, as you had higher inflation in Turkey, you had Turkish investors moving away from fixed income and just buying up Turkish equities because that was the only way that they could keep pace with inflation. And so the Turkish stock market is literally levitating while Bloomberg and the FT are, oh my God, can you believe the Turkish lira and what President Erdogan is saying about the Turkish? Okay, but like Turkish stocks are going up to the moon. And not only are markets doing that, Turkish manufacturing companies are stealing market share from European companies. The freezer that I had to replace my freezer with just a month ago, made in Turkey. Like they're making high-end things. Think about the drone warfare that Ukraine is prosecuting against Russia. It's Turkey that makes the drones. It's Turkey that's at the forefront of that. And they've been putting to bed some of their other issues. You know, they're putting to bed the Kurdish issue. They're expanding into Syria. The fall of Assad was huge for Turkey. You just traded a Russian ally at your southern border for a nominal Turkish ally that's going to think about Turkish interests in Iraq. We don't have to go down the Israeli-Palestinian rabbit hole. But often when I'm asked about that and people say, well, what's the biggest threat to Israel? Is it Iran and the nuclear weapon? No, it's Turkey. Because Turkey is the regional hegemon of this region, and Turkey is rising in that sense, and I think it's been showing us that it's rising in that sense. And then last, Brazil. I don't think de Gaulle actually said this, but he's reputed to have said it, and it's so good. He's reputed to have said that Brazil is the country of the future and always will be. And there is some There is some element of that to Brazil. I also think of all the countries in the world, I think Brazil is the most similar to the United States. I almost think about Brazil as if the United States had not had the Civil War, I think it would look a lot like Brazil does today. But I see signals that Brazil is changing. I see that they are finally doing things, boring things like reforming tax policy or like encouraging entrepreneurship. Before you could just sit and fix income in Brazil and you'd be fine. No, they want to start building vertically and they want to have integration. They want to make things in Brazil, and they're starting to do that. And they are sitting on, like the United States, tremendous energy reserves, tremendous agricultural reserves. The US farmer's biggest problem is not China today, it's Brazil, because they've become the low-cost producer of corn and soybeans, and they're coming for wheat next. So in that sense, if you could get Brazil as more of a regional leader, and if they could extend their power and influence to the Pacific, which is possible because a lot of these Latin American states are weak and need that kind of leadership, suddenly you have an American-style political formation in South America that can have some of the same benefits I think the United States could have. So very optimistic about Brazil in that sense, and I think there are a lot of opportunities there. So yeah, there's 4 gems in the rough for you.
Okay, and before we go, I'd like to end with, I've asked you a lot of questions and you talk to a lot of investors throughout the world. What would be, in terms of from an investment point of view, a question that I didn't ask that I really should have?
A question that you should have asked that you didn't.
Like, what's at the top of your mind that we've talked about a lot of different things. Is there something I missed that is an issue that I really should have been delving into a little more?
The thing that we didn't touch on, and it's hard to touch on it, is the role of technology and specifically artificial intelligence and how that is going to work into all these things. And I'm a geopolitics analyst. I'm not an artificial intelligence expert or a technology expert, but technology really does matter when it comes to the future of geopolitics. And this is where energy also comes into the conversation as well. And it's another area where I really like the metaphor of the 1890s, because in the 1890s, 2 things happen. We move from coal to oil. And we move from coal to oil because Winston Churchill, as First Lord of the Admiralty, says, okay, the British Navy should have oil-fired ships, not coal-fired ships. And then things change geopolitically. And then you also have the rise of electricity. And so those 2 things spur incredible amounts of innovation and growth and prosperity. I sort of view what's happening with artificial intelligence in a very similar light, and it's dovetailing with another energy transition. It's not going to be one-to-one. It's not coal to oil, but it's oil to solar, nuclear, wind, renewables, geothermal technology that hasn't been invented yet. So you have this massive competition with countries, which countries can drive down the cost of energy the most. And then in those particular markets, can you start to innovate on things like artificial intelligence, and can you have these use cases? This is, for example, why we talked about 4 really big countries. Another country that I'm incredibly optimistic about, despite pessimism for most about its politics and even from its own people, is Chile. And I'm really optimistic about Chile because they have the most solar potential in the world, they have the most wind potential in the world, and they have some of the greatest geothermal potential in the world. They don't have to lift a finger to have some of the cheapest energy you could possibly have. And the thing about artificial intelligence and data centers and robotics and IoT is that it consumes a lot of energy. So the countries that are able to produce a lot of energy in a secure way at a very cheap rate, they're the ones who are going to be able to innovate on these technologies and create use cases that we probably can't even think of. So we didn't touch on the role of technology with these things, but that's another sort of subset of how I'm thinking about the world. Whereas before we would have said, it's the United States. The United States is the cutting edge of technology. If you want the best biotech, the best coding, the best robotics, it all goes to the United States. That's not true anymore. We're still the leader in some things, but you start looking around at countries that either have that energy mix that is attractive, or who are making things, or who are making advances in biotech. Like, that's a really interesting place where I think we're going, where technology starts to overlap with geopolitics.
Jacob, I realized that one thing I did miss was I mentioned the fact that I originally kind of was brought to your writing was brought to my attention from this European piece. We didn't even talk about Europe. But it's getting too late, and we're going to have to just, you'll have to promise to come back so we can talk about Europe and talk about that great piece. Before we do, though, we're going to end with what I call the Trader's Desert Island. And for those who don't know, there's a show on BBC called Desert Island where they ask celebrities their top 10 albums that they would take onto a desert island. We do the traders version, where we ask the top 3 albums or top 3 bands, and then also a trader that can be from any time period over through history that's going to help you sit there and trade from the desert island. So let's start with your 3 bands or 3 albums. What would you pick?
I love this question. I probably could have come up with 10 on the spot. My 3 albums are: number 1, the White Album; number 2, Led Zeppelin 4; and number 3 is the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" soundtrack. I think I'd be okay.
Really?
If I had those
that
3
third one, I'm going to go. I haven't heard that, but I'm going to go listen to that. And by the way,
I love you. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, by the way, you're a millennial, but you're not really with those first 2 picks.
Well, I'm a geriatric
60-year-old.
I'm a geriatric millennial whose parents educated him well in music. So yeah,
what were you going to say about the
Brother, Where
third
Art Thou? Like, well, I love folk music, and I love old timey Americana music, and I love all the different artists that are on the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" soundtrack, like Gillian Welch and Alison Krauss are at the top of the mountain for me. And so like I probably would have given you a Gillian Welch album or something like that. But if I only have 3, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," they're all on that album. So I can at least get, some American folksy stuff and a lot of different artists there. So that's why
that is terrific. Okay. And we're going to end with the trader that would help you sit there and trade. Who would you pick?
Well, the self-serving pick is our chief investment officer at the Bespoke Group, Robert Laherty. Obviously, because he's the best trader, I think, in the business, and I'm only half kidding. I've been working with Rob for 5 years now, and I think he would. It's funny. I don't know if he would say. You said I'm not allowed to. Oh no, I don't think you.
I said you can't pick the 3 that being the previous picks. Is what I said.
Well, and I think Rob would tell you, because Rob is really the one who schooled me in these things. Like he would probably go with Jesse Livermore or with Paul Tudor Jones. And we often joke on my podcast about Paul Tudor Jones. And, a fellow Southerner, I sort of have a soft spot for Paul Tudor Jones. But I'll actually, besides talking up Rob in a joking way, I'll give you a really unorthodox pick, which comes from my own background, and probably somebody you've never heard of, and somebody who is not a trader. Because as you can probably tell, even though I work in investments now, like I'm not a trader. I'm somebody who sets long-term horizons. And if you left me to my own devices, if I didn't have guys like Rob around me who are really good at trading and about translating my big picture ideas into actual shorter trades that can make a lot of money, I'm just a guy who wants to see the trends unfold. I want to buy things and then hold them because I have that high level conviction of trends over time, and I think things are going to evolve. And I come by that honestly because I think he's my great-great or great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Mark Monroe. Everybody called him Pat. He was from Quincy, Florida. He was a banker in Quincy, Florida. And in the 1920s, he realized at the height of the Great Depression that even as people were poor and couldn't afford anything, they were still buying Coca-Cola. And so he told everyone in his family, and he himself, to buy Coca-Cola stock hand over fist, even in the apex of the Great Depression. He was a banker too, so he would even issue loans based if you had Coca-Cola stock as collateral. That was how strongly he felt about it. And for a while, the town that he was in, Quincy, Florida, was had one of the largest percentages of millionaires in the world because all these people listened to him. But this is before Warren Buffett figured out Coca-Cola, right?
Right. I know this story. I've read about this town, and that was your great-great-grandfather or something?
It absolutely was. So I'm Jacob Shapiro, but my mom was Anne Monroe, and so Pat Monroe goes all the way back there. And so I pick him because that's, like I said, our chief investment officer. He's going to tell you the pros and cons of all the different traders. I'm the geopolitical guy. So what I want to do is I want to have a really, really high conviction in one thing that I know is going to be true over time. So rather than somebody who's on the desert island, because I'm not going to have a whole lot of access, I just want somebody who's going to be like, you know what? This is going to work. Have some patience, and then go listen to Led Zeppelin 4 for the 500 bajillionth time, because that's all you have to do with yourself. So there's my very unorthodox.
Oh, that's great. That's a great pick. All right. Before we let you go, Jacob, why don't you tell us about, first of all, let's start with your firm, and then we'll end with your Substack. So tell us a little bit more about your firm. You mentioned your chief investment officer. Tell us a little bit about it, who you serve, and how people that are the appropriate people can get in contact with you.
Yeah, I wear many hats, but my primary hat is as director of research at the Bespoke Group. We are, for lack of a better word, a multifamily office. We struggle with that because you say the word family office, and I feel like it conjures an image that isn't particularly what we are. But we work with high net worth families and individuals around the world. And for some of them, it's about everything from, legal planning, legacy issues, even custody of cryptocurrencies, right into custom, portfolio construction, real estate property management, the whole 9 yards. And then also some people they don't need all that, but they just want access to our bespoke or custom investment strategy. So we have a class of client, even in the multifamily office, that does that. So that's what I do as my day job. And I'm director of research there. So some days it's the macro point of view. Some days Rob is coming to me and saying, hey, we're long this Turkish mining company. There's some change in Turkish mining laws. Can you please look at this and tell me if this thing is about to go belly up? Like, it's a really dynamic place to be. And then in addition to that,
wait, before you get off that, why don't you tell
please.
people exactly how they can find that if they have interest? Because you have a name that is a little tricky, because there's another bespoke group out there. So let's just make sure that people go to the right one, because I know I struggled with when I was looking you up.
Yeah, and it wasn't a problem, I think, when we originally started. But anyway, so it's if you want to find us, you go to bespokegroup.io. That's our website. And we're the multifamily office sort of version. There's also an investment company out there, so that's not us. But bespokegroup.io is the place to find Bespoke.
Okay. Now let's move on to your Substack, which is where I recently came across you.
Yeah, well, so, I'm putting out, I'm doing lots of research, and I try to put out some content in general. So I publish things for free on Intersubjectively Transmissible. You can just look up Jacob Shapiro Substack and it'll pop up, because that's a mouthful of a name. It actually comes from, my father was a political science professor, surprise, surprise. And he used to describe that term, intersubjectively transmissible, was what he told his poli-sci 101 kids on day one. He said the entire point of learning political science is to learn the things that are true between us. And that was what he described as intersubjectively transmissible. So things that are true, no matter what your objective or subjective point of view is. And then, the Substack really also is deeply connected with Geopolitical Cousins, that podcast I do with Marco, and my own podcast, the Jacob Shapiro podcast. So if you're looking for content from me, but you're like, I don't want the bag of watches you're selling over at the multifamily office, like there's plenty of stuff and content you can engage with on that school.
Oh, I didn't realize that you have also your own podcast. So we have Geopolitical Cousins, where you talk with our friend Marco Papich from BCA now. And that's you guys do that on a fairly regular basis. And then you have your own podcast. Where do I find that? I didn't know this one.
That's same place. And it's just the Jacob Shapiro podcast. We played with some other clever names before, but nobody could ever find it. So just Jacob Shapiro podcast. Yeah, Marco originally started coming on my podcast like once every quarter. And we finally looked at each other and said, this is really good. So we split it off and made it its own feed. And then my own podcast, honestly, I'm tickled that people listen to it. It started as I was just recording conversations for my own research purposes, and I was putting them out there because I thought they were useful. It's usually me talking to, sometimes it's subject matter experts in geopolitics, but it's really whatever I'm interested in. Like, one of my best friends from Cornell recently wrote a book about the death penalty in the United States. We had him on and we talked about his research and things like that. So it's really just a grab bag of whatever's interesting to me on a regular basis. So one of my best friends actually tells me that he loves to put on my podcast to fall asleep, because apparently the dulcet tones of my bass just hit it right the right way. So if you're having trouble sleeping, let me recommend to you my podcast. Is that a good advertisement?
That's a great pitch. I love it. Jacob, I've had so much fun and really appreciate you coming on. You'll have to come on back on and we'll do the Europe discussion. Thank you very much for your time.
Anytime. And maybe we get Cousin on also next time, because he's even more bulled up on Europe than I am. We can get the whole gang together.
That's right. Thanks again. All right, Patrick, it's time for Talking Charts. Everyone's missed you.
Oh, you know what? What a day to come back with a huddle right on the jobs number. Listen, we took the summer off. Like it was all fun and games, but now we're down to some serious business, and we got to pull out the crayons and take a dive into this here. Well, first of all, let's just pull up the jobs numbers, right? Okay, so by the way, I don't know, was there revision to previous
The
months?
revision was actually in line. Like, there was no problems from that perspective. Like, as most people know, last month, that was the big thing, was that the revisions were huge. This time the revisions were, in essence, like inconsequential. Like, they're just irrelevant.
So the non-farm employment change came in at 22,000, which was a huge miss. And you can see like on the chart, like other than that one November 2024 number along the election period, there really has not been a bad non-farm employment change number like this in a long time. And the last time we had a miss was in 2021, where it was like negative, I meant. And so like we're borderline turning. And the other thing to observe is that the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3. And the one thing then when you go back through history and look at when unemployment rate stops being sideways and starts trending, rarely is there just one bad print. It tends to, especially when it breaks key levels, it tends to be a feedback mechanism where you get numerous months over and over again of bad thing. Like it's entirely possible that the jobs numbers have, are starting to indicate, I don't want to say the R word, but definitely they're starting to deteriorate. What's your interpretation of it all?
I'm with you. I can't disagree with any of that. The jobs numbers are looking bad. The real question is, with all of the immigration kerfuffle or changes that are occurring, are these numbers needing to be viewed in a slightly different way? And I know you had James Bianco on that podcast you cheat with me on, and he's been highlighting the fact that very much the immigration is affecting that. And so no longer will, what was it? Ended up being 22,000 jobs created.
Yeah.
And in the past, that would be terrible. And in this environment, it might not be quite as bad as before.
I don't buy that. I'll explain why. Like ultimately, population growth and immigration are actually a major driver of growth. And that's when things are good and immigration's coming in. We never say those numbers have to be pared down because immigration was high. In the end, when you cut off immigration, it is actually impacting growth. So
I'm not going to disagree with you there, Patrick. And that was kind of my point, was that it might not be as bad as previous times, but it's still not a good thing. And it's still not showing that the economy is growing. So I think we're going to agree there.
So let's talk about the impact. Obviously, we're going to look at the SOFR futures here in a second. But the big thing was that even yesterday, there was a zero probability of a 50 basis point cut on the September meeting. There was zero. It was all 95, 96% going for a 25 basis point cut. And right after this jobs number, a 14% odds suddenly popped in for a 50 basis point cut. Now, I mean, still on balance of probabilities that they're going to do one cut, but we now have the highest part of the bell curve distribution that there's going to be 3 rate cuts this year. They're basically, whether it's 50 basis points on the first one or whether it's just one cut sequentially in each of the last 3 Fed meetings, the markets have suddenly priced in 3 cuts, and clearly there is Powell's going to have to make a full dovish pivot here. I remember just a month ago how he was saying like inflation has to be the focus, and just amazing how in 1 month Powell has so clearly pivoted.
Yeah, and I was just pulling it up on my Bloomberg here, trying to figure out if the terminal rate has changed, because you are correct that a lot of those cuts were brought forward, meaning that they are pricing in more. And I was trying to figure out if they actually had changed the terminal rate today. Oh yeah, like it looks like it's all been brought higher.
Even like here, like I have the SOFR December 2026. Which we're looking at rates at the end of next year, which, rate cut cycles can last multiple years. But, looking at the potential of the end of 2026 is a reasonable measure of where rates are roughly going to be at the end of the cut cycle. I mean, we clearly had a jump from the 97 level to 97.16. So they're pricing in almost a full extra rate cut in one go.
So I had pulled up the SOFR 1 month futures, which I didn't even realize that they traded until a little while recently. One of my subscribers pointed that out, and I thought it was terrific insight. And before the kind of the lowest contract for the next few years was the September 26, and it was trading at 96.87. So that would have been like 3 1/8. was the previous kind of terminal rate. No, I did that backwards. No, I did do it right. 3 1/8 is correct. Yeah. And now it's trading at 97. So it's gone down to 3. So we're in essence there, but that is as the economy weakens, that is the real question. Will that terminal rate change? Meaning we all know that as the economy weakens, we're going to get a lot of those rate hikes brought forward. But the real question is, will they expect the Fed to lower rates to a lower absolute level?
Yeah.
And I don't know, like part of me wonders if 3 is too high. And then we, on this rate cutting cycle, we might get lower than
I'm 100% in that camp. At least what my view is that it's absolutely asymmetrically skewed in your favor to be in the SOFR futures market for an upside move, because in my mind, the Fed is not going to suddenly pivot and pull next year, or at least not pull all of next year's rate cuts out of the market. I view the downside risk here is simply that that they may become more neutral at some point, and it's something is pulled out of the SOFR futures, and maybe we have, let's say, a 50 basis point pullback. But I think that we could be pricing at the end of next year a 2% rate. It doesn't mean we'll get there, but the SOFR futures might trade there when traders start to anticipate something, especially if there's a bunch of more bad data. And so I continue, and this is one of my, I wasn't a short-term rates trader years ago, and you converted me. Yeah, listen,
aren't you happy?
You and Alex, I am. I'm happy being a stir trader. Like,
because not only that, you owning the TLT, you haven't lost, but you haven't really made anything. Yeah. The curve is steepened, and that's what we
listen. We'll talk about the long bonds in a moment.
Okay, but that's what we warned about, is the fact that the curve was steepening, and therefore you could be all bearish on the economy, expecting lower rates, and the long end might not do anything. And that's exactly what it's done. Over the last year, you basically just earned your coupon. There's been no excitement there. You haven't done well.
Not yet. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. But point is that the SOFR futures were huge movers today. I would argue that the bond market and the currency markets were the big reactions to the jobs numbers. Now, the stock market, we'll talk about this in a second, but definitely the big move, 100%, was in the rates markets and the dollar in second, in my opinion. Now, but look at this, all right? I know, like for instance, Jim Bianco was talking about a trade that is near and dear to your heart over the last several years. And I want to emphasize that this is a theme that you've had, and it's a very big picture theme, but that's inflation is going to be much stickier, much higher. And the long bond is not going to be as easy, is not going to be a safe haven the way everyone expects. That's been a big theme. But let's just talk technicals here for a moment. What's really evident here is that the 10-year bond is breaking out in a big way. This is not only did we have that big move on last month's jobs, but it did a classic flagging Fibonacci retracement down to its 50-day moving average, held that support like a flag, and blasted off now back to the Liberation Day highs. We have at this point a bond market that is actually basing at the 10-year, and now the 10-year has been much stronger than the 30-year. I'm sure that that makes a lot of real estate guys and other people happy, because that's obviously the 10-year is the most important interest rate benchmark in the whole world.
Except they borrow, like most corporations or whatever, borrow at the longest 10, and very few people borrow at 30. But one element that does borrow at, or one cohort that does borrow at 30, is mortgages. So I'm not quite sure. So you said it makes the retail.
But doesn't the mortgage rate, interest rates, still benchmarked against the 10, even though they're 30-year terms?
You're right, because of you're correct that it trades more like the 10. You're right.
Okay, but the point here, look at this breakout candle on the 30-year.
Yeah. Listen,
Okay,
no,
like first
today
of all, I
was
get it.
different.
I get it
Today,
that being in the SOFR futures, I get it. That's been a great thing. But I'm just talking about this reaction to the jobs numbers. They have legitimately turned the bond market. Now, what I always look for in the markets is when they transition from a bear phase
yeah,
into a basing, what I call an accumulation cycle, but a basing formation, and then you look from where it potentially is breaking out. Now, one day does not make a new trend, and therefore I'm not ready to make a bold call that this is all upside from here. But when you have a basic 8+ month basing formation that established itself, and then you have a breakout out of a multi-month consolidation, technically there is room for these things to go. And at this moment, I don't think you have to be I don't think you have to ruin your long-term bear thesis on bonds. And because this is not a macro call, this is a
yeah.
short to intermediate technical call, right? So this is not about trying to change a big macro fundamental thesis. But when you have a bear market decline of this magnitude, if we have a shoot above this weekly 50-week moving average, can bonds during a period where we're heading toward the R word, gravitate back to highs where they were in 2024? Like, this is not like we're going back to 2021 and 22 levels. Like, this is simply going to the top end of this range. One day doesn't make a new trend, but you got to watch this, because this could have been the spark that starts some sort of a squeeze in the bonds. And we're going to find out whether or not this gets a feedback mechanism that gets this going 120, 123 back to like liberation day highs or something like this in the next little while. Any comment on this?
I hate to say this. I actually agree with you. And I will say something else. I have less steepener, almost zero, and I am the least short bonds I've been in a long time. My number one rule is that when
I feel like we're in a confession.
I know
like
when
I'm
my
the
number
priest
one
here,
rule.
and you're
When I start having positions that that podcast you cheat on me with is recommending, I have to unwind them. So that was just no. Right. And kidding aside, I think that there's a lot of negatives out there in terms of people very, very excited about the possibility of Zimbabwe and hyperinflation and yada yada yada. And I tend to be more in the camp that the economy is rolling over, and so therefore it's tough for me to be really super bearish bonds. One of our one of our guests, the fan favorite Cuppy, I think he's been doing this publicly, so I don't think I'm outing him. He's long bonds, and he keeps telling me, he goes on to Twitter and talks about this, and everyone tells him, sorry, you don't get it and you don't understand. And the kind of his main point is that the bearishness out there is just so pervasive that the surprise is going to be the other way. Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing. For me, I can't bring myself to go long these things like you do. I am long,
but I'm playing it through bull call spreads.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So the thing is that you can get some very nice asymmetric bull call spreads. We opened up a 90-95 TLT for like $1. And you outlay a small risk, have a 4-to-1 payoff ratio. You're not taking crazy risk on a long-term play that bonds are super bullish. You're not going for yield and other things. Yeah. You're just playing the fact that they could counter trend, right?
Yeah.
So
I still think though that the front end is going to be a better place to play. And I'll continue to say that
the bull steepener is the way to I think the bull steepener is more important than the at this moment, and therefore the short rates are going to move much more on a basis point basis, right? Okay. All right, so let's go to the dollar, because this is the second place where there was a huge move. Now, I was watching this sideways consolidation developing, and I was in my traditional form speculating on whether this would have a bullish breakout above the 50-day and squeeze everyone out. But this this jobs numbers crushed that speculation almost immediately. Not a single close above the 50-day moving average at all on the dollar index. It remained down there. And this news basically broke the dollar to that lower low. And to me, that's important to watch. Like the euro was on the verge of a breakdown below 116 and quickly caught the reversal. But the one that is near and dear to your heart, the US dollar yen, it based since April. It's been in a consolidation, and it did a retracement back to the 50-day moving average, which was about a 50% retracement. It really was highly vulnerable technically for a US dollar squeeze up to 152, 153. And look what the jobs numbers did to it, right back down to the lows. This and the question here is that is this entire US dollar yen move, this consolidation, over because of this? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we step back on a weekly chart, and you see the bigger kind of topping formation that the US dollar yen put in back over here. Well, what we had was essentially a market that did a 50% retracement here, like the US in terms of a quick rally back to this 150, 151. If this at this 50-week moving average is failing, and we have any breakdown move, then the next symmetrical move actually sends this thing down to like 132. Like it could even head right back to 2023 lows near 130 and so on. Now, I'm not already calling for that, but I'm saying that this is such an important moment on this chart, because if this follows through on today's breakdown, and we break down below the July, August lows, and as a clear indication that the yen is rallying and the US dollar is breaking down again, technically there's room for this to go another full leg. And that would completely crush all my hopes and dreams of a US dollar squeeze. And now, again, like we talked about, one day doesn't make a new trend, and we're recording this just hours after this move has started. So I'm not ready to make any bold calls. What I'm trying to do is explain that if this started a chain reaction of a new trend, and we saw these things get in motion, you can't ignore these kind of pivots. This has been such a dead market. Nobody's been interested for months because it's
Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself.
Well, I guess you like watching paint dry, because this thing is literally not moved.
No, you're right.
Right?
No,
right. And so like people are interested when the thing is moving.
Yeah, you're right.
And it hasn't been moving. And the thing is that is it about to become interesting? And this is I'm very curious if that ends up playing out that way.
Much like our podcast. Is this about to is this ever going to become interesting? By the way, while you're away, can you pull up the DXY? Because the Currency Whisperer sent me a note, and it was early in August, so I'm not really sure where he stands now. I'm pretty sure I know, because he's longer term like me. But he says, however, if the DXY product I despise, more on that later. I'm not sure why he despises it. Probably because there's too much euro.
Because it's too much euro. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's not really reflective of a basket.
Yeah. He says if it takes out 97. So where are we now?
97.5.
Okay. He says if it takes out 97 and then 96.37, I guess that's the lower end of the. Yeah. That's the lows.
Then we're going back to 90.
Hey, did you read my email? Because that's literally what he wrote.
Dude, look at the chart. I can tell you exactly what he's seeing.
Yeah.
Like, look, if this is the midpoint of this thing, then any technical measured move is right back down to those lows, right?
There you go.
So like if it gives out those lows, this isn't exactly in line with that yen call I was talking, because the yen would have to be making the move to 130. The euro would have to be heading to 120 to 125 in order for the Dixie to make this kind of a move, right? And so this is all kind of all in one thing. Like, you have to watch. And now I can't think of a more bullish thing for gold though. But let's actually talk S&P.
Okay,
Let's
you
talk
want to go to
S&P
gold
500.
or do you want to go to S&P?
No. Let's get the S&P, because look, the market is so important. We have to like get it to the market.
Okay.
But obviously, gold is going to be important to talk about here in a second. S&P 500, prairie dogged.
Did a prairie dog?
Well, it basically, on an intraday basis, it prairie dogged, not on a daily closing basis. But this morning's reaction in the pre-market gapped it to an all-time high, and it faded. Now, this is something I like to not ignore. I like to pay attention to.
Can you zoom in there so the last old men?
Absolutely. I'll put on a 4-hour chart here.
Oh, it did prairie dog.
Right.
Wow.
And
no, by the way, you didn't mention it. A noble animal.
It is a noble animal. And and so, to me, this is something you don't want to ignore, because we've seen numerous this happen. Like, notice where the previous high was here and what the market did. It temporarily broke to a higher high.
Yeah.
Then look at this high and temporarily broke to a higher high. It's a part of what technically is, if I'll just zoom in a little bit, it's a rising wedge formation technically. And a rising wedge formation is often seen at the near tops of markets. And that's where the market is transitioning from a bull phase to distribution, which is that every rally is sold into. So in other words, it's still a bull trend. It's still always showing 52-week highs. So every retail GIMP that's looking at their Okay. I know. Listen, I'm going to call it the way it is. Listen, any retail GIMP that looks at the market value of their portfolio still sees that they're up 35% on the year or off the April lows. They don't see the fact that the market is losing momentum up along the top side, and smart money is selling into strength, where they're basically doing all of their active distribution up along the highs. And you can't see it when all you care about is your market value. Right? When you're looking at the market value portfolio, it looks like you're still making tons of money and this is a major bull. But this is a very heavy market that's being sold into in every rally. And therefore, while we have not yet technically seen a breakdown candle that has marked the beginning of a new bear decline, we have not seen a trigger that has said the new sell-off has begun. But I can't think of a worse asymmetry in a market than we are at this moment, where when you compare the upside potential of this market to the downside risk, it is so massively skewed against you. And if you are not hedged up here, you shouldn't be like this. You should be lightening up. You should be doing anything and everything other than buying more here.
Wow. Did you go to like university for the month you were away? Because you came back so much smarter.
That was calling people, calling the retail GIMPs, right?
No, but honestly, that was you articulated that so well, and I am 100% in your camp. I am not going to tarnish that at all by saying anything except bravo. Okay.
It's one of these periods where maybe the market even there are a number of technical measured moves that actually target 6,600. And in my mind, there is nothing stopping this market from at some point upticking up to 6,600. Right? Like so by no means are we saying it's all downside from here. Just go and load the boat short just yet. But, especially if we see, and this is the big tell for me, if we see a bearish engulfing candle by the end of today, which is that it wipes out all of yesterday's rally, and whereas one big red down and it engulfs it, that is a pattern that is common along a top. And it hasn't yet engulfed the previous day. So we can't say we just saw a bearish engulfing candle, but that's the thing to watch into the close. If we end up, down 80, 90 points by the end of the day, that's going to make the weekend a pretty anxious kind of a period to watch how this kind of plays out. One way or another, the S&P here, it's really at a very fragile moment, and you have to be very careful here on that.
Okay.
So
now you want
quickly,
us to talk gold?
First, NASDAQ showed
Okay.
some short-term relative strength relative to the S&P here. Obviously, Google had an extraordinary move. A couple of little things ran this. Google continues to keep plugging along with that massive gap on that positive news. But a big one to continue to watch is that this is the first day NVIDIA closed below its 50-day moving average since the March-April sell-off.
Did you see the news about AVGO and OpenAI?
No.
So OpenAI is going to make a series of chips with them. I think that's the shot across the bow. I don't usually trade individual stocks, but I went and leaned into the short side of NVIDIA for the first time in a long time. You'd be proud of me.
You're about to get you are about to get some hate mail, sir.
No,
you can email it Kevin at themacrotourist.com.
At Big Picture Trading.
Anyway, but
he's the one who thinks you're a gimp.
All right. So what's it called? Anyway, the bottom line here is that the will NVIDIA here start something that takes all the momentum out of the Mag 7s. Notice the Mag 7s did break to higher highs. And it'll be very interesting to see whether they can, whether NVIDIA ruins the party for the Mag 7s bouncing in the short term. Now let's move on to what you wanted to talk about.
Gold.
And that's gold. All right, $42 again. It really is building now. What a interesting retracement. Now I'm going to go specifically to this December contract because the gap on the contract roll was deceiving, but it literally has been coiling up in a 4+ month horizontal triangle pattern. And horizontal triangle patterns are tricky because and this is where the skeptics of technical analysis will always come out. Is that a double top or is that a triangle formation, right? Like you're basically there, you can, in the eye of the beholder, you can geometrically put whatever shape you want on it and make a thesis based on that. But let's break gold down in the most simple form, which is it basically has remained in primary bull trend this entire time. I'm just going to put 200-day moving average on here and want to highlight, like, for instance, here, I'll put it on, but we have not even gone to retest the 200-day moving average. There's a primary bull that was going on in gold. And what was amazing was that whether you go to this 3-month consolidation, whether you go to this sideways triangle consolidation that took about 3 months, or you take this 4-month one, what's amazing is gold has consistently done the pattern of, instead of correcting backwards and doing a retracement where it gives back half of its gains in a typical 50% retracement, which is incredibly common in the stock markets for it to do, but rather each time the consolidation has been rather sideways before the next bull breakout. It's amazing, but it's been repetitively happening over and over again over the last 2 years. And this breakout, again, sets in motion a new move. Now, when you have this big of a horizontal triangle formation, then the rules of symmetry come in, which is like that old saying, there's a saying in technical analysis that flags and pennants and stuff fly at half mast, which is basically this becomes the midpoint of the next rally. And so if you measure out the length of another $900 rally, we're going straight to 4,000 just based on that rule, which is essentially that if the rally now is of the same length of the previous rally, we're going for the 4,000, and from a time measurement perspective, that measures out to sometime by October. And so we'll see whether there's follow through here, but a $300+, another 10% upside on gold toward the 4,000 mark is the technical move.
It feels kind of frothy to me, Patrick.
Okay.
We used
Now
we used to talk about this, and even when we were bullish, there wasn't that many folks. Now all of a sudden, there's like crazy $5,000 targets. All
you
these
know the
things.
blow off top. You're pulling a Jim Rogers here, where
listen,
you think
I
I know
am fully aware that after calling for the $1,000 up week, that I won't stick with it and won't be long for the $1,000 up week. It's the way of my life. It's like I've accepted my fate in life. But it's just I see the enthusiasm and it just scares me.
Kev,
I'm not saying I'm short. I'm still long, but I'm just saying.
You know what?
Yeah.
I want you to come to the dark side because the option skews on gold continue to give very, very rich premiums for very far out in the money strikes on gold. And while you can't do it at zero cost, you can do incredible asymmetric collars on gold, where you can buy, let's say, a put option $100 or $200 below where it is, and offset a huge chunk of that cost going $500 higher.
Yeah.
You can build some great hedges in there, which then allows eventually. I know that the retail guy's going to get cleaned on a pullback, and but you have it hedged out.
That's what happens to GIMPs. And for those who want to know more about this strategy, please contact bigpicturetrading.com.
Shameless plug. Thank you, sir. You're a
Anyways, we want to keep it tight, so I'm going to let you have the last word there. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about?
No, listen. The one thing I do believe has gotten way too frothy is the gold miners. And what I'm curious about is that even if gold does go to 4,000, will the gold miners run full parabolic, or will the gold miners at some point diverge and where they have already kind of reached their upper targets? Like when we go to a weekly chart, we have literally right now hit the resistance of the all-time high.
Yeah.
Right. Like literally we're trading at the price we were in 2011, 2012.
So I actually have been more bullish on the gold miners than the gold.
You wrote great articles on that. Anyone who wants to get those kind of calls can subscribe where, Kevin, at themacrotourist.com.
But I did sell a whole bunch this week. I'm like, because it's getting too frothy. This is getting
for members, we bought the $65 protective put.
There we go. That's probably smarter.
We basically came in there and said, fuck it, we're going to spend $2 on a protective put, because, when you make $8 in a week and a half, you can give $2 back to just continue to see whether there's more upside and lock in the sale price. Right. Anyway.
Okay. What else did you want to talk about? Crude oil.
This OPEC, more supply. Right? Look, this let's put back the 50-day moving average. The crude oil attempted to close above its 50-day, complete rejection, was very short-term, 50% retracement. Right now, the failure of this, if it breaks that low, it's going back to double bottom retest that April-May low down around $58. It's disappointing, but what is interesting is that energy stocks don't seem to give a shit. Like what we're seeing is, well, okay, fine, there's the last few days, things like the XLE have been giving some back, but we have seen actual accumulation in energy stocks, and generally they have been being bulled in this environment. And I find it really interesting that oil and energy stocks are diverging this way. What do you make of that?
I don't make anything of it. You are paying more attention than me, but I did want to ask you a question, because for the first time in a long while, I'm thinking about going long nat gas. And it's just, I love it. So I was wondering if you could give us your, crayon magic on, let's do the strip. So you like to trade this UNL, which is terrific. I love this thing.
Here's my take on this. We are finished a symmetrical move, which is basically, so we're now oversold enough, and we're going seasonally into the winter months where we're past the term structure roll down and stuff like that. But this is a strip, so that doesn't matter in terms of that. But what I want to simply highlight is that last time we saw the bottom, it still took 4 months, and the rally didn't start till December. While we probably are very close to low, I would argue $7 probably will not be violated on the bottom end of the range. But I won't be shocked if you're still grinding for a couple months, waiting for the basing formation to finish before. But on an asymmetry basis, that we're much closer to the bottom. Very small amount of risk to the downside. But the way I would play is that you only buy a small amount that you're willing to hold through a sideways range, and then wait for actual technical breakdowns to double down on it when the trend becomes your friend.
I like to go all in real early and then just sweat it out and complain for 3 months. But,
then do it, because 3 months you might be waiting, but it's a good level.
Okay, thanks a lot. The
other thing is that just uranium. Like finally the U308 started upticking, and the Sprott physical has finally started to move, stayed above its 50 days, stayed above the 50% retracement, about to break to a higher high. While the uranium stocks seem very rich and expensive and have run too much, it really just looks like the beginning of the uranium trade. That's all I've got. We're done.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Patrick, where can they find more of this great analysis?
You've already given me the pitch.
Come on, give it again. Give it again.
Bigpicturetrading.com. You can check out my YouTube channel where
that's right.
out every single day.
Yeah,
Patrick's
cut back on the cigar smoking, and I just walked all over him trying to plug that. It's Patrick Ceresna. It's not
_Ceresna.
_Ceresna. And for those who don't know how to spell it, it's CERESNA.
You had to read that, right?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I'm not like you with the Ron Burgundy. Okay, and if you want to go check out my letter, go to macrotourist.com. Listen, folks, it's great to have you back. Bull market, bear market, we're just happy to spend some time together on this crazy ride. Now stick around for a real quick after show.
All right. Danny boy.
Danny, so we're going to make you the star of this, buddy. So
right.
I can tell that you're no longer at home. Tell us where you are, what you're doing.
Today, Matthew, I'm going to a rave.
Matthew?
Yeah, have you never watched that show? Is that an English thing?
I was like, did I
90s?
I thought I screwed up his name, and I was like, oh, is he like doing a gig?
He's going to a rave. I love it. This is the way shit rolls in Portugal, right? Like, it's like what you do is you load up the laptop right in the parking lot of the rave.
Is that where you are? Are you in the parking lot?
I'm in the van, but
he's ready to go party. Like, he is ready. Like, drop the mic here. He's going straight to.
I have something embarrassing to tell you guys.
Oh, tell me.
So I'm born in 1970, and raves became popular. What?
So you've never been
mid 90s, maybe early 90s. So I've never been to a rave.
Come on over. I'll take some videos for you.
Take some videos, because I have no desire to be the 54-year-old idiot that's
Listen,
I don't know what Silicon Valley.
All you have to do is you have to put on the heart-shaped glasses like Jeff Bezos, and just have a young girl beside your side, and then you're fit right in.
Anyways, not a chance. Not going to happen. But I am looking forward to your videos, buddy. And we have to go do some other things, so we'll call it a night.
Absolutely.
Have a great time, Danny. Send us videos. Take care, everybody.
Everyone. Cheers.